UB Bulls fans, did you miss us? Well, never fear, Bullseye Nation is here, and this time we are coming at you with the men's basketball team. We are here for the hardwood, and so we will be talking about UB's last 3 games to open action, including their 2 big wins over Northern Illinois and Ohio, and then the disappointing loss last night to Miami of Ohio Redhawks. We're going to hear from UB Bulls radio play-by-play man Josh Wetzel. You'll also hear from Norm Rodriguez and much more. All that straight ahead on this edition, basketball edition, season debut of Bullseye Nation, the podcast. And it starts right now. What's going on, Bullseye Nation? John Kruba here to take you through the UB Bulls men's basketball last 3 games, including their loss last night to Miami of Ohio, as they fell by a final score of 91-80. And for UB, they are 2-1 in the MAC. That's a pretty good start, but given the fact that they lost to a team that was winless in the MAC coming into this one, you can't help but feel this one was a bit of a disappointment to let get away, especially considering how well UB had played at Millett Hall in recent years in Oxford, Ohio. And you're going to hear Josh Wetzel describe that in more detail a little bit later on this postgame. But just a disappointing result. And now UB still looking to get their first road win of the 2022-2023 campaign, and also looking to bounce back, but they'll have another opportunity to do so as they'll take on yet another MAC foe in Central Michigan this upcoming Saturday from Point Pleasant. But for UB, they did open MAC on a bang, so we're going to take you through the 3 games UB has played in the conference so far, and we're going to start with the thrilling victory UB was able to get at Alumni Arena to open conference play, and that was against Ohio, as UB clung and was able to hang on in a nail-biter 75-72. And in that game, it really displayed the Bulls' resiliency, because UB fell behind early on their home court, 19-13, but like a pendulum, the game drastically swung in UB's favor, as they would go on to take a 29-23 lead, and so they would actually have the halftime advantage. But Ohio, not to be outdone, opened the second half on a 10-0 run to go from trailing 39-32 to leading 42-39, but UB countered with a 12-0 run of their own and retook a 51-42 advantage. Ohio did continue to battle. You got to give them a lot of credit for that. They continued to cut the deficit down late to as close as 73-69 and then 74-72. But after a big 3 throw that UB was able to make, UB was able to guard well on the last possession. Ohio missed the game-tying 3-point attempt, and UB was able to prevail with the victory, 75-72. A very nice win. And I think the good thing out of this game is it showed the Bulls' resiliency. You know, we talked about it. If you've been listening to the football version of this podcast, you know, we saw how many times that football team for the UB Bulls was resilient and had to overcome adversity. Well, that's what the men's basketball team displayed in that one against Ohio. No, it certainly was not perfect. Definitely did not get off to the start you wanted to on your home court, but in the end, it didn't matter. UB was strong enough to overcome the challenges that Ohio was throwing at them early. And to UB's credit, they got it done. And also Curtis Jones, who continues to be UB's most consistent offensive player, led the way with 20 points. And again, he had another strong game. Hard to think of where this UB Bulls team would be at without him, as UB currently sitting at 8-8 and 2-1 in the MAC. And Curtis Jones has certainly been a catalyst for this offense so far this season. We look ahead to the next game for UB, and that was a home date again with the Northern Illinois Huskies, who actually had come off a big road victory, beating UB's next opponent, Central Michigan, by 20 points. Well, that wasn't a problem for UB. Northern Illinois got blown out. UB opened the game. You want to talk about a night and day difference from their start against Ohio. UB got the crowd into the game early and never looked back. UB opened the game on a 16-5 run, and then they closed the first half on a 9-2 run, and they took a commanding 45-28 lead into the halftime locker room. And quite frankly, UB with that big a lead, not only could they start to rest players, which I think is going to be very important, especially as we come down the second half of the schedule here, but also with that lead, it allowed them to pretty much coast to victory. The second half was pretty even as UB only outscored Northern Illinois 35-34. But remember, they had that 17-point lead at half, 45-28. So it didn't really matter. They were able to just close it out and get the victory, 81-60 over the Huskies. And again, I thought it was huge to get the crowd into it. You know, to come out like that, you worried whether UB was going to come out flat after that big nail-biting win over Ohio. That did not happen at all. Just a great job by the UB Bulls. They were ready to play. You could see they were ready to play right from the opening tip, and give them credit because they got the victory 81-60, and so they improved to 2-0 in the MAC with that win. So following those two big wins on their home floor, UB took to the road to take on the Miami of Ohio Redhawks. And, you know, going into the game, you felt really good. Miami, Ohio, 0-2 in the MAC coming into this one. And not only that, UB has been very good in Oxford. They have really had a string of dominance over the Redhawks, but that was not to be. You thought UB could cruise to a 3-0 MAC start. Well, this is why you don't play the games on paper. You got to play the games and play them for real, folks. And in this case, for UB, the result was not anything you would have predicted from looking at this matchup on paper. But give Miami, Ohio credit. They were ready. They came in. They knew they needed to get their first back win to stay in the chase. And they pretty much just outplayed UB, especially on the offensive end of the floor. And Miami, Ohio won by a final count of 91-80 over your UB Bulls, dropping UB to now 2-1 in the MAC. And I think the thing about this game, as I've thought about it here, you know, I've kind of struggled whether to describe this as a slop fest, a track meet, just a comedy of errors, or maybe a mixture of all three, because that's certainly what it was. First of all, UB was horrendous at shooting free throws at the charity stripe. They were absolutely terrible. And for a team that's been pretty rock steady over the last couple of years at shooting free throws, tonight was not a good night for them. Just not a good night at the line whatsoever. And it really came back to bite them because Miami, Ohio went 18 of 21 at the line. UB went 23 of 38. That's right, 23 of 38. They missed 15 free throws. And look, the deficit in the game was 11 points. There's your difference. You hit those free throws, you win the game. But in the end, they did not. Both teams, though, were horrendous also at protecting the basketball. Total turnovers, 22 for Miami, only 17 for UB, but that's still too high a number as well. Usually, though, when you win the turnover battle, you win the game. But because UB struggled so poorly from the free throw line, ultimately, it did not matter. Miami, Ohio was able to take advantage when they got to the line. UB didn't, and that was the difference in the game. And I think another one is going to be three-point shooting. 40.7% for Miami, Ohio. UB, a dreadful 17.6%. Miami, Ohio went 11 of 27 from beyond the arc. UB, 3 of 17. So I think you can see just in those stats right there where this game really turned. And, you know, what do they always tell you? You got to hit your threes when you can get them, and you got to hit your free throws. I know it's annoying. It's cliche coach talk, but it really is so true. If you do not execute those fundamentals, it is very, very hard, no matter what level you're playing basketball at, to win a game. And ultimately, UB really did fail in those two categories in this game against Miami, Ohio. And that's why they were handed their first MAC defeat of the season and now will look to bounce back against Central Michigan on Saturday. So now that we have recapped the last few games for UB, let's take a look at the stats of the game for UB in their loss. We'll do their most recent game, the loss to Miami of Ohio. So we'll take a look at the stats of the game right now. Miami, Ohio, field goal percentage 51.7% from the field, 31 of 60. Meanwhile, for UB, it was 46.6%, 27 of 58 from the floor. 3 points, we already discussed that, 11 of 27 for Miami, Ohio, just 3 of 17 for the Bulls. Free throws, again, another key difference. We mentioned this as well earlier. 18 of 21 for the Red Hawks, 23 of 38 for the UB Bulls. Rebounds, 34 to 31 overall for the Red Hawks, but UB was good on the offensive glass, 12 to 11 over the Red Hawks. Meanwhile, 23-19 on the defensive board for Miami of Ohio. Assists 16 to 10 in favor of the Red Hawks. Steals 13 to 5 for the Bulls. 2 blocks for both teams. Total turnovers 22-17. Miami actually turned the ball over 5 more times. So if there's one thing Miami still needs to correct from this game, it has to be taking care of the basketball. Fouls 26 to 19 for the Red Hawks. And the largest lead, Red Hawks had 13, UB had 5. But that fouls point, that's another point I wanted to bring up, is that the fact that the referees, they didn't let them play tonight. They brought the whistles and they did it all game. Give them credit for being consistent. The only thing I don't love about it, UB was in the double bonus early in the second half. Miami, Ohio also fell into the bonus. Whenever you have a situation where you have that many fouls, it does tend to disrupt the flow of the game. And I thought that certainly happened in this game last night. Again, you got to give the refs credit. They have a tough job. And again, at least they were consistent. But sometimes you'd like to maybe see them put the whistles away a little bit. And last night, they certainly didn't do that. But regardless, UB shot themselves in the foot with the turnovers from the free throw line and not being able to hit any three-pointers when they needed to. Add those things up, and you have a 91-80 defeat at the hands of the Miami, Ohio Redhawks. So those were the stats of the game. And for the UB Bulls, that is a recap of their last 3 games. Well, you've heard some of my opening thoughts. What did radio play-by-play extraordinaire Josh Wenzel, who's making his debut on this podcast, very excited to have him on board. But what did he have to say about these games since he caught them live up close in person? Well, let's find out right now as I sat down with Josh to talk about the UB Bulls, where they stand at this point in the season and their last 3 games. And we'll bring it to you now right here on Bullseye Nation, the postgame. And we are here on Bullseye Nation talking about UB Bulls basketball, and who better to hear it from than the voice of the men's team himself, Josh Wetzel. And Josh, first, thanks so much for coming on and doing this. And how you doing?
Good, John. How you doing?
I'm doing okay. It would have been a lot better if UB would have been able to pull off that win last night in Oxford. Unfortunately, I feel like, Josh, I'm kind of struggling to describe it between the game last night being a bit of a slop fest to a track meet and a lot of errors in the game. But I think you said it on the broadcast that the fact is UB had their chances at the charity stripe. They did not take advantage of it like they needed to. And I think in the end, that really did come back to bite them.
Yeah, they shot a ton of free throws. I can't remember exactly how many, but they shot a ton of them and only shot, I think, 60% from the free throw line. And Miami's one of the best free throw shooting teams in the country. So Miami did a much better job than UB. Of course, the Miami fans were upset that UB got to the line as much as they did, but it was a weird game because, on the one hand, both teams committed a ton of turnovers. But by the same token, offensively, both teams shot pretty well, with the exception of the Bulls shooting free throws, and UB didn't shoot threes very well either, but they shot very well other than that. So the shooting percentages were good, but both teams turned it over a ton. There were a lot of fouls. So it was kind of a really weird game. You're right.
And I think for UB in this game, what also it seemed like every time, especially in that second half, Josh, when UB would cut it down to one after having to come back, they got so close to getting over the mountain, reaching the peak, and then all of a sudden Miami, Ohio would come back with a quick 6 or 7-0 spurt, and they were back to 7-8. It was almost like helter skelter. You go back to the bottom, go back to the top.
Yeah, that Mabry kid, the freshman, made 5 threes for Miami, and he had not been shooting very well, but all of a sudden he shot well last night. And Kamari Williams, and talking to the Miami people, played maybe his best game of the season. That kind of came out of nowhere a little bit. UB's had trouble with Mekhi Larry in the past, and he's one of the best guards in the league. So I'm sure the Bulls coaches would tell you that they don't think they did a good enough job against him. But Miami really shot the three overall very well in the game, which is unusual against the Bulls because UB on the balance of the season and really going back now several years has been really good at defending the 3-point arc. So they didn't do as good a job of that last night, and that's obviously one of the things that ended up costing them as well.
Well, from what you saw, just to follow up on that, from what you observed, do you think it was a case maybe of just fatigue, or do you think maybe they just had an off night defending the three?
Yeah, I'm not sure, to be honest with you. I think for one thing, Miami shoots a lot of them and they make a lot of them. That's kind of what their game is really revolving around offensively, is the 3-pointer. So they're going to make their threes no matter what. But the Bulls have been pretty good at shutting down teams. They've been good at shooting threes too, and last night just didn't get it done. I think that's one of the questions I hope to ask Coach Weitzel before the next game on the pregame show, is just what was the breakdown in his mind defensively. They're allowing Miami to shoot that well from three, so we'll find out. I think that Morambo guy, the big dude, 6'8", 310 pounds or whatever, does a good job when he gets the ball around the high post to kind of spraying it around a little bit and finding open guys on the perimeter. And Larry last night had a career high 10 assists. So he was certainly somebody that was targeted on the Bulls scouting report because he's so good. And I think he made the Bulls pay a little bit, not only in terms of scoring, but also obviously in terms of finding open people on the perimeter to make 3-pointers.
And, obviously that was the game last night, but we're recapping the last couple of them that they've had to open MAC, and they're still 2-1 overall in the MAC. I think they pulled off a huge game at home a couple games ago against Ohio. What a huge win to open up MAC.
Yeah, obviously you want to get off on a good start, number one, and then Ohio obviously has been a thorn in the Bulls' side, and a lot of other teams as well around the MAC over the years, because they've had a pretty good program. This year, Ohio is lacking some of the players they've obviously had in previous seasons, but they still have talent. But that was a big win, and again, a game that, had the Bulls shot free throws better in that game, really would have been a more convincing win than just 3 points. That was a game that really felt like, at least for me, I felt like UB was really in control of that game pretty much from start to finish. And then they followed that up with a pretty convincing win over Northern Illinois. But I think anytime you can knock off Ohio in MAC play, you've got to feel good, especially when you've got them at home, where you've got to take care of business when you're at home around the MAC.
Yeah, and I think, though, what's more impressive about that win, Josh, and we're talking with Josh Weitzel, radio play-by-play for the men's basketball team. For UB, they didn't get off to the greatest of starts in that game, falling behind 19-13 early. But give them credit. I mean, they then went on a full run and took a 29-23 lead at one point. I think that says a lot about the resiliency of this group, and I think it was very important they put that to good use against Ohio the other night.
Yeah, and even I think early on in the second half, as I recall, Ohio made a run and if not tied it, I think they went up by a point, and then the Bulls immediately responded and went back in front and led the rest of the way. So it was a really impressive win. And I thought the way the Bulls had played the first 2 games in MAC play really led me to believe that they would win last night. I was, as a fan and a broadcaster for the team, I was probably overconfident that UB would have an easy time at Miami, which I shouldn't say an easy time, but I really I really thought the Bulls would win last night. It's also been a place in the MAC where it's never easy to win on the road. But having said that, UB has had really quite a bit of success at Millett Hall in Oxford over the years. That's probably been, and if you're talking about at least the old MAC East teams,
Yeah.
they've had more success at Miami than probably any other place that they go to in the old MAC East. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be last night.
No, but maybe that loss to Miami, Ohio can be a lesson for this team going forward. You know, they have Central Michigan coming up, you know, that's another team that's below where the Bulls are as far as standings wise. Maybe this could be a lesson that, hey, don't take anyone for granted. You still got to go out there and play.
Yeah, and you certainly can't take any road games in the MAC for granted at all either. If you look at the way the schedule maps out, and who knows about preseason polls, but the Bulls have a shot here to have a really good start to MAC play. Now they let one slip by last night, but now you have Central Michigan on the road. Again, a road game, but the Bulls have played really well at Central Michigan, and they've beaten the Chippewas, I think, 12 straight times. Central Michigan just lost last night by 20 to Northern Illinois, a team that the Bulls just beat by 20. So, a chance to win that game and you're 3-1, and then you come home to face Bowling Green, a team that also was picked toward the bottom in the preseason polls. They started off MAC play, though, pretty well. So we'll have to wait and see how it goes. I know I'm talking in a way that the coaches would never talk because they want to make sure the players take it one game at a time, which is the smart way to do it. But if you do look at the preseason polls and how the schedule maps out, these are games the Bulls really need to handle before they get into what figures to be a much more difficult part of the schedule.
I would totally agree with that. And I think the thing for UB is that, obviously, put these wins in the bank. Yes, you lost to Miami, Ohio, but you beat Central Michigan. All of a sudden, you're 3-1 in the MAC. And through 4, that's pretty good, especially knowing you had to play a tough Ohio team, was able to get that done. So I think if they can still come out with a win against Central Michigan, I would have to think, for the most part, Coach Weitzel and the Bulls would be very happy with that.
Yeah, I think they would sign up for a 3-1 start after 4 games for sure. They would rather be 4-0, but if you're 3-1, that would certainly be something they'd be happy with. The Bulls, hey, look, this is the 25th year the Bulls have been in the MAC. They haven't started 3-1 in MAC play that many times. So still a chance to have a pretty darn good start to league play. Now, Central Michigan's interesting because I just mentioned they got beat by 20 by Northern Illinois, but they also went to Michigan and won right before MAC play began. So they could very easily be 2-1 right now. Their second MAC game, they blew a huge halftime lead over Eastern Michigan. So this very easily could be a matchup of two teams that are 2-1. But Central Michigan stubbed their toe in the second half 2 games ago. So I'm not quite sure what to make of Central Michigan on Saturday. I know they've had a ton of injury problems, and their best player's been out for the majority of the season, Kevin Miller. So, but they've been able to cobble it together, and they've obviously played okay at times. But that win at Michigan, I mean, that has to really get your attention. I know Michigan hasn't had the kind of season that they hoped they would have, but that's a pretty big win for Central Michigan going into Chrysler Arena and coming up with that victory.
Yes, indeed. But, it's funny. It's funny how it works sometimes. Northern Illinois did beat Central Michigan by 20, but prior to that, Northern Illinois got handled at home by the Bulls. And I mean, that's another game I wanted to bring up. They started the game on a 16-5 run. How good of a sign was it, going into that one? Yes, it was another MAC game, but you would just come off that thrilling win at home against Ohio. How key do you think it was for UB to get off to the good start, not come out flat? And they took a 16-5 lead, never looked back, Josh.
Yeah, they really were in control of that one from wire to wire. And the Bulls have really played well over the years against Northern Illinois, with the exception of the 3 straight losses there, somewhat inexplicably 2 or 3 years ago. Northern to me is a team. I mean, I almost hate to say this, but I really think Buffalo's got them outmanned. Northern at a talent level, just been a big disparity, let's face it, over the years between Buffalo and Northern Illinois, if you go back over the last 10, 12 years. And every once in a while, though, Northern will pluck somebody off, as they did obviously yesterday against Central Michigan. But, they've had a lot of issues over the years, just from, I think, a talent perspective more than anything at Northern Illinois. And, the coaches sometimes will say it's not the X's and the O's so much, it's the Jims and the Joes. And I just think, Buffalo and a lot of teams in the MAC have better talent than Northern. That would, I'm sure, fire them up and get them upset. But that, I think, has been a big issue there. And I really think Mark Montgomery did a really good job as the head coach at Northern Illinois. They let him go before, or actually during the season, I guess 3 seasons ago now. But I think he did a really good job. And it's one of those things where, you always think the grass is greener, but considering the lack of resources they have there, and just the status of that program over the years, I think Mark Montgomery did a really good job. And, they're just constantly kind of in that rebuild mode, so to speak, in DeKalb. But I know I kind of got twisted around there and went in all sorts of different directions. But yeah, that was a workmanlike win for the Bulls. And that's a sort of game where you go into it really thinking this is one you need to take care of business. And sometimes those games stub you in the toe, but fortunately the Bulls were ready to go, and they did indeed take care of business in that game.
Yeah, no, and as far as UB goes, I guess the thing we could say is Northern Illinois, as far as being a MAC rival, thank goodness the Bulls are not in that spot. UB certainly has the better talent, so I think that's at least the positive. Like, you look at Northern Illinois, and we're like, let's not become them. Let's try not to fall into that.
For one thing, make sure you don't get a court that looks like theirs. That game was at Alumni Arena, but if you've ever seen their court, it's just the ugliest floor in Division I college basketball. If I was Rashawn Burno, their head coach, I would try to take money out of my salary. Let's get a new floor. We can't do this. But I will say this: it seems like Northern has had a lot of bad luck too over the years. And even in the game against Buffalo the other day, Keyshawn Williams, who's a really good player, got hurt and didn't play very much at all in that game. Now, honestly, I haven't seen yet. I don't know if he played yesterday against Central or not, but I mean, Keyshawn Williams is legitimately a really good player, and they didn't have him for the majority of that game against the Bulls because he got hurt. So, that was another thing that honestly really helped prevent them from making a better showing in that game at Alumni Arena. And, they for whatever reason have been one of those programs where it seems like at times they've been a little bit snake bitten. And I think, hey, hopefully for them, they'll turn that around. I like a lot of the people over there, and Jeremy Reed, a former UB athletic communications guy, is their athletic communications person. He does a phenomenal job. And unfortunately, he's had to write a lot of press releases about losses over the years. So for him, if nobody else, I'd love to see them kind of turn it around and have a good run for a change.
Absolutely. Yeah, I hear that. Like I said, Bullseye Nation, the podcast, we support all UB, whether it's past or present. So, but talking about the current team, Curtis Jones, he's been big so far this season. He had 19 points in the win against Northern Illinois, and he had 20 against Ohio, and he was good last night again. What have you seen from him so far this season that has really made him stand out? Because he's been one of the leaders offensively, a catalyst for UB so far this season.
Well, I know the coaches talk about how hard he worked in the offseason, and it seems like a lot of college players take a big leap from their freshman to their sophomore seasons, and I think that's kind of what we're seeing with Curtis. But one of the things that makes him so dangerous is he's one of these guys coaches say is a 3-level scorer. He can score at the rim. He's got a really good mid-range game, and he's really been good shooting the three. I had kind of an off night shooting last night, but his 3-point percentage over the last, I think, 11 or 12 games is somewhere around 41%, which is really, really good. So, you certainly have to respect his ability to shoot the three. And if you come out there and crowd him, he can get by in and shoot that pull-up jumper really well. So I think he really wants to be a terrific player, and it sounds like he wants to be kind of a team leader. And you hate almost to evoke this name because it could put pressure on somebody, but you can't help but watch him and think of him almost as a CJ Massenberg type in training a little bit. I know Paul Peck and I have talked about that, and it seems like Curtis has some of those CJ Massenberg type of attributes away from the court, even in terms of leadership, in terms of being a really high character kid and somebody who I think is pretty good in the classroom and those sorts of things, just like CJ. So you might use the poor man's CJ Massenberg at this point, and if he ends up being 75% of the player CJ Massenberg was at UB, I think Bulls fans would be obviously really, really thrilled with that.
Just a couple more things here, Josh. Before we look ahead to the Central Michigan game, which we've kind of done a little bit of, but I want to delve into it a little bit more. But up to this point in the season, even before MAC play, if you could sum up sort of what you've seen from the Bulls as a team heading up to this point in the season, what has really stood out to you about them, and maybe where do they need to improve a little bit?
That's kind of a tough one for me to answer because I've thought about that a little bit, and it seems like it varies somewhat from game to game a little bit on what stands out. Early in the year they weren't shooting threes well. They didn't shoot threes well last night, but the 3-point shooting had certainly been trending in the right direction. I've been super encouraged by Isaac Jack, the freshman from Canada, who I think has been a terrific find for UB. Isaiah Adams has been trending in a really nice direction. Zid Powell has been good. He had 8 steals last night to tie for a single game record in UB history. That was big, and it's great to get him back healthy after missing 3 games with the dislocated shoulder. I mean, all in all, just for me personally, I think the team, even though the record is at 500, has maybe played even a little bit better than I expected. And, my expectation level for this season really rose a lot after I saw them play a couple of times this year. And I realized just how talented some of these new players were, because who knew what they were going to look like with all these new guys? I mean, nobody had seen them before other than the coaches. So it was kind of difficult to try to predict what was going to happen. So I still think these guys are going to have a really, really good season. They play a fun brand of basketball, and I hope fans will come out and support them at Alumni Arena, because I still think this team has a chance to do some really great things. And, I don't know what it looks like right now. It sure would be great to get Cy Chapman out there. That's the one X factor, I think, with this group, is that the Bulls don't have any clarity yet on Cy Chapman's eligibility, really, in terms of his transfer from Illinois State. And they're still having to kind of wait on that. And, I think Cy, coming back from a knee injury, maybe wouldn't be able to play quite yet anyway. But if you add Cy Chapman to this team, that's a whole different element that really would give them some added punch offensively, especially. Now, the later it gets in the season, obviously, it's starting to look less and less likely that he's going to be playing for the Bulls this year. But that would be huge. And I don't want to get any Bulls fans' hopes up there too much listening to this, that Cy is going to play, because I don't really know. I have no idea. But that would be really awesome if he could play for the guys this year. Unfortunately, from the sound of it, the NCAA is kind of dragging their feet a little bit on figuring out if he can play this year or not. So who knows?
So what do you think they have to improve on most? Just what stand out? And I know you said it's pretty different from game to game, and I agree, but what is really the pressing thing if they're going to achieve the higher expectations? What's that hurdle, in your opinion, you think they need to get over?
Maybe it's a recency bias, but cutting down on the turnovers would be maybe number one for me, because that has kind of reared its ugly head a little bit from time to time throughout the season. They've been doing a better job of not turning it over the last few games until last night. But that's something that I think sticks out to me. Free throw shooting, again, with the recency bias, jumps out. I'm not that worried about the free throw shooting, though. I know they've had 3 games in a row where they haven't shot free throws very well. That, for whatever reason, has seemed to be kind of a streaky thing for teams over the years. You kind of either have guys that make free throws or you don't. And I think this team largely has pretty solid free throw shooters. So I'm not that nervous or worried about their free throw shooting. Uh, so turnovers would probably be number one. And then I think number two would just maybe be defense in general, I guess, based on how Miami did against UB last night. Um, but we'll see. I don't know. I think I'm not a coach, so it just those are just my thoughts right off the top of my head. I know rebounding would have been something I would have mentioned early in the year because they were getting hurt on the glass quite a bit. And let's face it, over the last number of years, the Bulls have been great rebounding. Early in the season, they weren't rebounding that well. Then all of a sudden, they really were rebounding great. And then last night, Miami out rebounds UB. They've not been a great rebounding team this year. So that kind of caught me by surprise a little bit. I know Central Michigan coming up is a team that's rebounding better. So I think that'll be something very interesting to watch this weekend.
Last thing, you kind of just took the words out of my mouth. Central Michigan, obviously, they did fall by 20 to Northern Illinois, but they're still to be respected. And just some thoughts, how you feeling about this team going into that one?
I haven't had a chance to dive too much into them, but I know they've had really terrible injury luck this year. I mentioned Kevin Miller. Kevin Miller is one of the best guards in the league. He's only played 4 games, and to the best of my knowledge, he's not going to play this weekend. He's only a sophomore, but when he comes back, that's a big boost to Central Michigan because, again, he's one of the best guards in the league. The kid is really, really good. I think that is really hurting them offensively, it sounds like. Over the years, UB's beaten Central Michigan 12 straight times. Most of those games, UB kind of has had their way offensively against Central Michigan. They've generally scored a lot of points against them. Central Michigan hasn't been a real good defensive team over the years. They've been more offensive oriented. They don't generally rebound real well. It sounds like this year's team has been a little bit different. They're not scoring as much, but maybe their defense and their rebounding is a little bit better. Again, the win over Michigan, and I know Michigan's not as good as they're supposed to be, but the fact that they went into it's still Michigan.
Yeah,
they went in Michigan and beat them on a 3 from Reggie Bass with 4 seconds left. That really catches your attention. So I think they're clearly capable of playing a pretty darn good game in a hostile environment in that case. So the Bulls had better be ready to go on Saturday. And I think they will be, especially coming off a loss on Tuesday, which I'm sure really got their attention.
Absolutely. I think there's no doubt about it. And on that note, Josh, thank you so much for coming on and doing this. UB hopes to get back in the win column. Thank you so much, and go Bulls.
Sounds good, John. Thanks, man.
As always, good stuff there from Josh Wetzel, play-by-play man for the UB Bulls. Again, I think he's going to be a great contributor to this podcast this year. He does an outstanding job calling games, and so certainly appreciate his thoughts. But as we promised at the end of the football postgame shows, you know him, and again, you're going to recognize him, Norm Rodriguez with his Normisms. We promised that he would be back as part of our basketball coverage. Well, we deliver on our promises here on Bullseye Nation, and that is the case right now. So we are going to bring in our featured analyst, Norm Rodriguez, to discuss what he thought about UB to this point in the season in their last 3 games. And as always, we can't have a Bullseye Nation post-game podcast without our very good friend, Norm Rodriguez. And as I promised, he was coming back for basketball, and here he is. So, Norm, how you doing?
I'm doing all right. It's good to be back here with you for the new year, even though it's been 10 days since that. But always happy to be a part of this podcast getting even stronger than what it was before I was on board.
Absolutely. No doubt. Great addition to the program. And, and I know you're pumped. You got your Josh Allen jersey today, so I bet you're geared up for that playoff game on Sunday.
Oh yeah, and we already know that turn the ball over. I mean, Glasso Banoa. I mean, Tagovailoa. We already know he's not going to be playing. So, in my opinion, the Dolphins are in trouble.
Absolutely. I think so too. I think the Bills are going to be able to fillet the fish. But before we get to that, we're talking about UB Bulls men's hoops, and the only thing that could make it better would have been had UB been able to beat Miami of Ohio yesterday. But unfortunately, as me and Josh Wetzel had discussed earlier on the post game, UB just could not hit their free throws and ended up suffering a disappointing 91-80 loss to the Red Hawks in Oxford.
Yeah, and this was a team just a few years ago. They were ranked for the first time in their program's history, but this year they're under 500 so far, and they've been slumping, but it's too early to panic. They're only about a third of the way through the season. I can still see them getting on a run. They are, from what I see, at 8-8 on the year.
And the good thing, Norm, is that they're still 2-1 in the conference. They got their first two wins against Ohio, and then they're also able to beat Northern Illinois. Unfortunately, this was a loss to Miami, Ohio, but they've got Central Michigan coming up next. They've struggled as well. They did beat Michigan earlier this season, but Norm, I want to go back to something that we have talked about many times during the football season, which is you can't take anything for granted. You have to go out regardless of opponent and play start to finish. UB did not do that last night, and unfortunately, they paid the price for it.
Yeah, they did, and it was a close game at the first half. At halftime, it was 37-34, and then they were just a victim of a 54-46 run in half number two, which gave the Miami of Ohio an 11-point victory. But you were spot on with the free throws. UB barely made 60% of theirs. They were 23 of 38, while the Red Hawks were 18 of 21. And not only did they get it done from the free throw line versus UB, they got it done from Treytown as well regarding three-point shooting.
Yeah, we know the Red Hawks have always been highly regarded with that. But I think something else, and I in my head listening to the game, Norm, because it wasn't televised, while listening to the game, in my head, I struggled to describe it as whether it was a track meet, a slop fest, or a little bit of both, because you had so many turnovers on both sides, and with all the fouls, it felt like, especially in that second half, the flow of the game was not good. And I think with the way UB runs a rhythm offense, I think that hurt them as well.
Yeah, it did. And taking a look also at shooting numbers, UB as a team, they shot nearly 47% from the floor, which is very acceptable in basketball. But the Red Hawks, they were scorching. They made over half of their field goals. They were 31 out of 60. And 27 of those attempts were from three-point range. They made 11 of them, with Mabray making 5 of those, respectively, for Miami. But UB's three-point shooting, besides the free throws, it was horrible. Only 3 of 17 from downtown, and missing threes at that rate, that shows you live and die by it. And in this game, UB died by it.
Unfortunately, they did. But the good news is, as I said, they are 2-1 in the conference because they picked up a huge win over Ohio a couple of nights ago back at Alumni Arena. And, I think it kind of displayed the resiliency of them, Norm, because Ohio actually got out to the quick 19-13 start, but then UB was able to take it back 29-23. And it really, throughout that game, it was like that, trading back and forth runs. Do you think it's a good sign that a team, that they're resilient, that they show they can fight back? How important do you think that is, especially when you enter conference play?
That's very significant because at the same token, it's always noble and admirable to go out with a fight rather than just throw in the towel, roll over, and die.
Absolutely. And it was a pretty insane game. Ohio ends up opening the second half on a 10-0 run, and they end up taking a 42-39 lead. But UB then countered 12-0 to make it 51-42. It was a seesaw back and forth, teeter-totter roller coaster type of game.
Yeah, it was. But at the end of the day, in that game with tug of war, UB was the team that fell in the mud.
Yeah, thankfully, UB was able to prevail. and it was Ohio that got tripped up. Great defense at the end. And then give them credit also for taking care of Northern Illinois. Now, Northern Illinois beat Central Michigan, who's UB's next opponent, and they beat them by 20, but that wasn't a problem for UB. They took care of the Huskies and opened the game on a 16-5 run. As someone such as yourself that's called a lot of basketball for WNY Athletics and things of that nature, in Jamestown how the crowd gets behind the team. When somebody goes on a big run like that at home, I mean, I gotta think that gave the Bulls that extra boost they needed to basically cruise to that win.
Oh, yeah, and when you're on your own home hardwood court, it's always the advantage because you got the fan base on your side. You don't got to worry about any of those heckling and whatever during free throws and anything like that. And when you're at home, the advantage always goes to you 9.9 times out of 10.
Absolutely. And and that was really a game. It was even in the second half, but a lot of that was because UB established such a big lead in the first half. They were able to basically coast. And I think they were able to get some starters some rest. And I think coming down the home stretch of the season, especially now we're in conference play, I think any extra rest you can give to your big players, it's only going to make the Bulls' lives easier down the stretch here. Do you agree with that?
Of course I agree with that. It also keeps them as close to fully fresh as possible because if you're playing those lower tier teams and it's a lopsided win or it's garbage time, you give the backup some time to play, let your starters rest up, and then with the conference games that really matter, the starters will be ready, and as well as the 6th, 7th man that go in respectively.
And, there's a player in particular I wanted to talk to you about, Nora. I mean, he's been one of the leading scorers, especially in these last couple of games. Curtis Jones, he had 19 points in the win against Northern Illinois. In addition to that, he also was good last night against Miami of Ohio, and he scored 20 in the victory against Ohio. What have you been seeing from him, the parts you've been able to see? What have you seen? A lot of people that I've talked to, especially Josh, thought he was going to be like a few UB great players of the past, like C.J. Massenberg, a couple other players as well. I more so compare him to Turner Battle, which was when UB made that MAC championship run in 05. When you look at what Curtis Jones has been able to do, what stands out to you about him?
Well, for starters, he's averaging 15 points a game in the season, which for being a sophomore on the team, Curtis Jones, that's nothing short of impressive. And his rebound totals for a guard over 5 a game, that's very acceptable. Rebounding like that, it reminds me of those point guards back in the old days of the NBA. I know you remember them too. Guys like Jason Kidd, Rajon Rondo, types of guards that can crash those boards with efficiency.
Oh, yeah. Yes, absolutely. The old school. That's I think that's the perfect way to describe him, Norm. I really do. And, I think when you have a player like that to build around, I think that, UB coming into this season, we weren't really sure what we were going to get. But I think when you see a player like Curtis emerge like this, I think it can only help to raise expectations. And I think that's pretty exciting as a fan myself. How does Norm feel?
Yeah, I feel the same way. When your starters improve year after year, it can make them eventually unstoppable on the court. And with Jones's play, if he can keep up like that, if he chooses to play the final 2 years of his tenure at UB, he could possibly get some eyes on a couple of NBA teams that may want to take a closer look at him.
And now, as far as looking ahead, Norm, now they've got Central Michigan coming up. This is a kind of another trap game like it was against Miami, Ohio. UB was able to avoid that when they played Northern Illinois. They had that big win against Ohio, but they still kept the intensity up against the Huskies. However, I think they fell victim to the trap game against Miami of Ohio. And now you're playing Central Michigan, who has pretty much the same record and conference record as the Red Hawks did. Remember, this is a team that went into Michigan and won, which is very impressive for a MAC team to be able to do that. What do you think the keys are going to be for UB to make sure they don't have another trap game?
Well, the first thing they need to do is contain their three top scorers, which are Miller, Zarzuela, and Taylor. Miller's averaging 18.5 in just 4 games, while Zarzuela and Taylor, they're both averaging near 15, with Taylor averaging almost 7 rebounds a game. So they have to be able to not just guard the bottom end of the low post to the mid-paint area, but they got to keep that perimeter secured as well around the three-point line, because the game of basketball in the last decade, it's evolved. Even if you're a 7-foot center, you are expected to hit those three balls at least every so often.
I would agree. And, I think UB, you know what? If they can get the win, they'd be 3-1 in their first 4 MAC games. Now, granted, they should, you can make the argument, be trying to go for 4-0, but all things considered, if they can start off by getting that win in Central Michigan and be 3-1 to open the first 4 games of action, I think they'd have to be pretty happy.
Oh, yeah, as long as you at least have a winning record in division play, it's always hard to be upset about. Even 3-1 it's not as impressive as a 4-0 start, but 3-1 to start it, that's still strong.
Absolutely. And, Norm, from what you've been, and we're talking with Norm Rodriguez, you know him for his Normisms, and our feature analyst, we're talking with him here. And the last thing here, Norm, at least one of the last things as far as the Bulls team goes, from what you've seen so far this season, just kind of sum up like what you've seen, what you think of this team to this point, and what you think their ceiling is going for, what their potential could be.
Oh, they've got an endless amount of potential in their arsenal, and they're known to put up a lot of points. But the thing they got to do is they need to start cutting it down a little bit on the defensive side, because in any sport, defensive play is just as important as on the offensive side.
Absolutely. I think that is a great way to put it. And I think for UB, let's see if they can get another winning streak started, get back on a roll in the MAC.
Oh yeah, and I've seen the potential. I believe they can do it, and what they need to do, I've said this before in a couple of past segments with you, John, they've got to be able to help themselves.
For sure. So we'll see if they can do it. Of course, folks, as far as UB, they're playing Central Michigan. As you know, me and Norm are going to have you covered. We will talk about their upcoming games after that. But here's hoping UB can get to 3-1. So, Norm, I want to kind of transition now. Let's talk about the Bills and the big news that came out today. Well, a couple pieces of big news that have come out, I should say. First, Damar Hamlin getting released and from the hospital and now on his way home. Just terrific news. And he was in the hospital, about a week and given how that looked, it's just what a great story.
Oh, yeah, and it could have been a lot worse. Not having oxygen for 9-10 minutes, that could have caused some damage to his brain.
Yeah.
Like similar with, I don't want to go into left field here, but this is kind of what happened. Do you remember that wide receiver for the Panthers back then, Ray Caruth?
Yes.
Yeah, his son ended up having permanent brain damage from when he got arrested for his thing, but he didn't have oxygen for nearly an hour and a half, and he ended up having a cerebral palsy. But for Hamlin, that could have been much worse. But today he was discharged from the Buffalo Hospital. Between there and Cincy, he was hospitalized, I would say, for about roughly 10 days. But the thing I saw that shows that he does have a huge heart, the money that was raised for his T-shirt sales, he's doing a fundraiser now for the hospitals in Cincinnati.
And Norm, thank you for mentioning that, so I didn't forget to. Not that I think I would have, but thank you for mentioning that, because it's just, we are one Buffalo, and I think that it shows the best of humanity. I mean, it's just absolutely incredible the way everybody, and it's not just Bills Mafia, it's everybody who came together, with the exception of a few good-for-nothing trolls. But for the most part, everybody came together in support of him.
Yes, they did. And they were able to get the win in New England, or against New England, 35-23. Personally, I was at that game. It was absolutely magical right from the start with Hines' first kick return touchdown in the game.
Tell Bullseye Nation what it was like actually being at that game.
Oh, it was awesome seeing all the support for Hamlin and how it started to finish, and even at the end of the game when everybody was out in the field shaking hands, giving hugs, we were all yelling out Hamlin, 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 and I'm expecting that to carry over this coming week, in which they'll have a third battle versus Miami. And from what we talked about before the start of the recording of this segment, I think the Dolphins are in trouble. They're down to their third string quarterback in Skylar Thompson, who's a rookie.
Yeah, and I was just you set me up for this now, my friend. I swear. Sometimes I feel like we have broadcaster telepathy. We're reading each other's mind, because I was going to mention the fact that, it's going to be a lot of the same casting characters from the first two. However, one noticeable absence is going to be the fact that Tua's not playing, and the fact that Teddy Bridgewater is not playing. And I know you and I have kind of come back and forth, and I gave you credit, and I stand by it last week as far as players' health coming first. But, when you see, obviously there's nothing Miami can do about Tua. He's in concussion protocol. So you understand that. But to see them, it appears like the Dolphins are not even going to roll the dice with Bridgewater and his finger injury. That's eye-opening to me, because now you're stuck, as you said, Norm, with your third stringer who's only made one career start, and quite frankly didn't look all that great against the Jets.
No, he didn't. He actually started 2 games. One was early in the season. The other one was the season finale. He did win one of them, but he had 1 touchdown to 3 picks. And I did also see earlier that Bridgewater will be the number 2 quarterback in case if it does get actually out of hand. And I was kind of surprised that he wasn't fully ready. He would be the better option because he does have starting experience. And when he's been healthy, he's been a serviceable quarterback.
Yeah, no, I would agree. But all the reports we're seeing coming out of Miami and Kansas City and San Diego, at least that I've seen online, they're all saying it's most likely going to be Thompson who gets the start. And, I think just like we talked about with the Bulls, Norm, I think we could say the same thing about the Bills. Just go out and play your game. Don't worry about who's starting on the other side. You need to go out, take care of business. Like I said, I know given the circumstances, the Bills did not have a chance to play for the 1 seed, but one thing they still do have is a pretty clear path, at least to get to the AFC Championship, and you're already guaranteed you don't have to go to Arrowhead, and at least your first 2 playoff games are going to be at home. So you need to come out, take care of business in your first one with home field advantage. Don't worry about who's playing on the other team. They just got to come out and play Buffalo Bills football.
Yes, they do. And they can't be too relaxed on this, because that old saying, any given Sunday, a team can pull out an upset. But besides the Minnesota game and the Bengal game obviously being canceled, the Bills finished the year on a 7-game winning streak. They're 13-3 for the second time in 3 years. They still got the 2 seed. They still won their division for the 3rd year in a row. And personally, AFC Coach of the Year, it should be no question. If it does not go to McDermott, that's going to be highway robbery.
Agree. As RJ, as great Rick Jeanneret would say, if he doesn't get it, Marty, call a cop, because indeed it is highway robbery. If McDermott loses, he certainly would have gotten hosed. But obviously with Miami coming in, we do know one thing. Dun, dun, dun. That means Tyreek Hill in the playoffs again. And I know that name brings warm and fuzzy memories to Bills fans like you and me in the playoffs. So I think one of the things that the Bills are going to have to do is keep him under wraps. Do you think are some of the biggest keys for the Bills, even if it's Thompson or Bridgewater or whoever? What do you think the biggest things are the Bills need to focus on to win this game?
Well, I can think of one other person they need to keep their eye on besides Hill. And in the 2 games this guy played in against Buffalo this year, he averaged almost 31 yards per catch. And that's the Penguin, Jaden Waddle. Even though they split the series, Waddle burnt them like burnt toast without butter.
Absolutely. And, I will say, Norm, the one good thing, that's why I'm glad Trey White got an interception last game. To me, that is the best that Trey White has looked since pre-injury. I mean, he looked as close to himself as he has. You know, didn't look real good the last couple weeks, but last week against the Patriots, to me, that was the best he's played.
And it couldn't have come at a better time. You do have to expect, obviously, chipping off some of that rust because he missed about a year because of that ACL tear. But that interception should definitely boost his confidence going into the postseason.
Is there any concern, Norm? And then we'll talk about the Sabres a little and then preview your next podcast, which I listened to your one the other day from last week, and it was outstanding as usual, my friend. But you know, as far as the Bills go, is there any concern? You know, obviously you were there, you saw the emotion. Everyone could feel it. I could feel it through the TV screen. Is there any bit of a worry that they gave so much emotion for DeMar and everything to win that game that maybe they potentially come out play, even though it's a playoff game with their season on the line? Did they maybe use up all in the emotional tank and now they play the playoffs against Dolphins to come out flat?
Personally, I think it's going to carry over throughout the entire playoffs for them. Like you said, there's 2 home games, and the good thing is, should they make the championship game, and I'm saying should, not will be, it's going to be at a neutral site. So Mahomes better not get too comfortable because obviously he's not going to be at Arrowhead.
Yeah, you know, we both have kind of made that point. You really have, and now I'm more so interested. It's going to be interesting. Mahomes, you know, all his damage in Super Bowl and great playoffs, you know, a lot of that has come, it's been in the confines of Arrowhead. Now, in the neutral site, he's going to have to go on the road. That'll be interesting to me. What do you think?
I think it will be too. And take a look. People rip into Buffalo and the Bills fans about 13 seconds. But here's the thing. The next week when they played Cincy last year in that championship game, Mahomes threw a pick 13 seconds into overtime.
Yeah.
And then when the Bills played New England, guess how long the Patriots had to lead for the entire game? 13 seconds.
13 seconds. Yep. There you go. Yeah, it's all tying together. And then kickoff returns 3 years, 3 months, and the 3 interceptions. It's incredible. The numbers, how it all, you know what it was. I'm not the biggest spiritual person, but it felt spiritual. I could certainly see what Josh Allen was saying.
Oh yeah, and with all of it like being third quarter, 3 picks, and all the threes like that, it made it even more memorable. And they will bring that energy going into this week against Miami, but they got to take every opponent seriously in the playoffs because when that hits, your record resets to 0-0.
Indeed, you know, it's 4 1-game seasons to the Super Bowl, so that's the way they got to look at it. Speaking of, we're gonna shift gears to the Sabres. You know, they were doing so well, and then these last 2 games at home. You know, what happened, Norm? They seem to have hit the proverbial wall, especially against the Flyers. Now, it's only a 2-game losing streak, so they certainly can recover with all the games they're going to have to make up, but not a great, especially after that big win against the Wild, not a great start to this long, elongated stretch of games they're going to have. Not a good way to start.
And I absolutely agree. And January through March, that's when you actually need to get on a good run. And it's like you said, it's just a 2-game losing streak. There's no need to necessarily hit the panic button, but their season has been a roller coaster ride. But one of the guys that Granato needs to thank for them having this good of a start, though, Tage Thompson. He's already got 3 hat tricks this year.
Yeah. He scored again the other night against Winnipeg. I mean, he's been a driving force. Him, you know who else he should thank? Rasmus Dahlin. He's playing like a superstar. Yep. He's playing like a superstar, and that's somebody, if the fans don't get him voted to the All-Star game, Dahlin would have gotten robbed too. He deserves to be there as well.
Or like you said in the words of Rick Jeanneret, Marty, call the cops. He got robbed of that goal.
Oh, we are not worthy. Yeah, it's just
bring out Alice Cooper.
Yeah, I mean, I think for the Sabres, it's just getting back to playing the way they can. Listen, they've had a really good run here throughout November and December. I think they're one of the best teams, actually, record-wise, at least through December, to get themselves back into the playoff race. But now the question is, can they, they've got all these games still coming up. Can they find a way to get back on track? And I think that needs to start tomorrow night. Start putting some goals in. Now, I saw signs of life from them against Winnipeg, so that's good. But now they need to build on that and start getting wins again.
Yeah, they do. And you and I both know they have the talent to do it. Their main goal should not obviously be the Stanley Cup because they've been in a drought for postseason for, I believe, 11 years. First off, they just need to worry about getting to the postseason and then cross the Stanley Cup bridge when they get to it.
Yeah, no, this is obviously Sabres and Bills are not in the same level expectation-wise, but the key is to have meaningful games, playoffs, not be meaningful for draft position. They need to snap out of that rut. And I think they still have the opportunity to do that, but they got to get all right. You had your 2-game little slip up. Let's get back. Those are mulligans. Let's get going again here.
Yeah, and the good thing is during these stretches of wins they've had, they were able to climb out of the cellar. Last I checked, they were in the middle of the road in the Atlantic. Last I knew, they were in 4th or 5th place.
Last I saw 4th, I think they're in 5th now, but I think they're still. And hey, for most of the season, we've had more points than the Florida Panthers, who were one of the best teams, and they were the 1 seed in the Eastern Conference last year. Who would have thought that, Norm?
Right? And what's funny is the Sabres, they're one of the top scoring teams in the league.
Absolutely. Yeah. And for a while they were first. So, when you beat Boston, Washington in their house, and you beat Minnesota, I feel like this is still a legit team that can fight for the playoffs. They just got to get it back together again. You're going to have those little bumps. Now they got to get out of it.
Oh, yeah, there's going to be ups and downs. There's nothing in this world that's perfect.
Yeah, absolutely, Norm. So absolutely, except for maybe your calling and your podcast. They're pretty darn good.
Well, I always enjoy the support.
Yeah, absolutely. Likewise. So speaking of your podcast, listen to the other one from last week. It was great the way you came back with a bang. Tell Bullseye Nation what they can expect coming up. I know you just did another one and fresh off the presses. Is that correct?
Yes, it was actually on the air tonight, but it is available on SoundCloud and WRFA's mobile app. All the segments are new and old. And for this one, it's just simple. Super Wild Card Weekend.
Absolutely. And I think that's the right way to go about it. It's we're in the NFL playoffs, Norm. And the Bills are one of the best teams and one of the top seeds. Far cry from years ago where they needed X, Y, and Z and the cow to jump over the moon just for them to even get a spot. Now they're one of the top dogs. What a time to be alive for a Buffalo sports fan.
Oh, yeah, especially, and I say this to fans all the time, if you were a fan when they were in last place in the division for 6 straight years or at all during the drought, even if they do win the Super Bowl this year, I'd look at them and say, you may claim, quote unquote, to be a fan now, but you didn't earn it.
Absolutely. You got to earn your stripes. You got to go through the suffering. So absolutely. Yep. And on that note, Norm, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Really excited. I think this was a very good, successful debut to get you back into the hardwood as well. So thank you. Thank you for your football contributions. Very happy to have you aboard for basketball as well. Go UB Bulls. Hopefully we'll be talking about some wins next time.
Oh, yeah. Horns up. Go Bulls.
That's right. Thank you, Norm. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
Again, that was Norm Rodriguez summing up his thoughts so far on the 2022-2023 campaign of the UB Bulls that sees them sitting at 8-8 and 2-1 in the MAC. And before we wrap up this edition of the Bullseye Nation podcast, as we do, we like to give you a tour around the MAC. And so we will do that right now. Kent State knocking off Toledo 75-63. Nice win there for the Kent State Golden Flashes. Boy, they continue to roll. Kent State, even though they beat the Bulls in football, the reality is their football team was not good this year. Well, basketball, totally different story. How about this? Kent State now 13-3 and 8-0 at home. Very impressive run. Kent State is not only red hot right now, they're white hot. Akron winning 74-70. They take down Bowling Green in a nail-biter. Bowling Green also gets their first loss in MAC play. Akron improves to 2-1 in the conference. A couple other games here from around the MAC. It is Western Michigan picking up their first win in MACtion, 85-79 over Eastern Michigan. It was Ohio 76-71 over Ball State. And for Ohio, they love playing at home. They are 7-0 now on their home floor. Just incredible stuff from the Bobcats. And the final score to tell you about, it was UB's last opponent, Northern Illinois, beating Central Michigan by 19 points. Central Michigan, of course, UB's next opponent, and Northern Illinois winning 73-54 at home to improve to 2-2 on their home floor, but just 5-11 on the season. And Central Michigan now 1-7 on the road, 6-10 overall. So that is a look around the MAC, and now we will look ahead for your UB Bulls as they get set to continue this road trip, and they got to go into Central Michigan, Point Pleasant, and take on the Chippewas. Now, again, as we said, for Central Michigan, they have had trouble. You heard Norm reference it a little bit earlier. 6-10 overall in the season, 1-7 on the road, 5 wins though at home. But the one road win Central Michigan does have, they went on the road to Michigan and beat them on a last-second three-pointer. And you heard Josh describe that earlier in the show. So this is certainly a team that is capable of pulling off a surprise. So again, I think it's going to be the key for the UB Bulls that learn from this game against Miami, Ohio. You let one slip away that you were favored to win. You got to shake that off and now take that lesson and apply it to this game. Because again, UB actually did a good job in the second half responding to various punches thrown by the Redhawks. Each time Miami would start to pull away, the Redhawks, all of a sudden UB would charge back, but they had to use so much energy to claw back to within one. Once that happened, it was like an invisible barrier. Once it got to within one, all of a sudden Miami, Ohio would pull away and play keep away. And eventually it was just too big a hole for UB to overcome, and they ultimately lost 91-80 in this contest. But they can take some of the things they learned, some of that resiliency, put it to good use against Central Michigan. And hey, if you're able to get the win there, you're now 3-1 in your first 4 MAC games. That's pretty good. And overall, I think UB, not only would they be back above 500, but I think they'd be very happy where they stand in the conference, because right now, looking at it, for the most part, no one other than Kent State, I believe, is undefeated in MAC play to this point in the season. So, if you can get yourself into that top quarter, that top tier, you're putting yourself in good position for the rest of the season, potentially an NCAA March Madness tournament run, an opportunity to at least get to the big dance. So that is going to be coming up on Saturday, and that is going to be when we speak with you next. So with that, that's a look ahead to the next game, and that is going to wrap up this edition of Bullseye Nation, the podcast for the UB Bulls. It is the basketball season debut edition. One more time, your final score of the 3 games that we covered here was UB, who took care of Ohio 75-72. They won 81-60, also at home against Northern Illinois, but fell last night at the hands of the Miami, Ohio Redhawks by a final count of 91-80. I am John Kruba. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll be back next week with another brand new edition of the Bullseye Nation podcast as we continue to break down UB's game in Central Michigan, plus their matchup against Bowling Green, and a whole lot more. So until then, this is John Kruba signing off. Thank you for listening, and as always, please remember, Go UB Bulls go. Good night, everybody. We'll talk to you again next week.